In this session of Life Groups, we're going to be talking about the sermon series that I recently concluded called Talk is Cheap, which focused in and around the Lord's Prayer and really just how the Lord's Prayer impacts our life. You know, when we stop and think about the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples to pray, typically most of us have memories of it, or we learned it as a routine prayer. We learned it as something that we would say almost without even thinking about it. It just seems to kind of fall out of our mouth. Having grown up in a Catholic family when I was young, the Lord's Prayer was one of the few prayers that I really knew by heart. It was one of those few prayers, one of those moments that I could feel like I was saying something to God, and even when I didn't really understand what her prayer life was about. Um, so in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 6, when the disciples are saying, how do we pray? And they're asking Jesus, and I can only imagine how inquisitive they were about, Lord, when you go off in the morning and when you talk to God, what is it you say? What do you pray? And he said, this then is how you should pray. And he began to give a structured series of petitions that had to do with alignment and acknowledging and focusing on the things that truly would matter for the alignment of my life and the realization of where my provisions come from and all those things. And so he gave them a format. The Lord's Prayer really would be, in my opinion, more adequately termed in our culture as a Christ follower's prayer. It's not a cheap prayer. It's not a routine prayer. It's not something we should just pray and before a ball game, so to say. It's deep and it's meaningful and it's not cheap talk. These petitions are fully loaded, completely engaged, incredibly deep. And so this week, you're going to be talking in your small groups and studying the first petition of the Lord's Prayer that says, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And when we think about the Jewish context of what's in a name, what mattered to a name, Jewish people would name their children with giving great thought to what that name would signify. It would signify something about the character attributes or the destiny that those parents hoped their child would aspire to live out in their own life. And so when Jesus is teaching these Jewish followers, these disciples, when he's telling them this and he's saying, when you approach the Father, hallow his name, honor it well. Don't forget the third commandment. Don't misuse his name, honor it. And there's very little that is hallowed in our culture. There's very little that is really set apart for honoring. We don't honor things well a lot of times in our fast-paced, watered-down culture. And I know it sounds a little harsh, but if you think about it, I bet it would even ring true as you reflect on the culture that we're a part of. What is it that we hallow? I passed a car the other day, and it had the number 3 on the back window of the car. And I don't follow NASCAR very closely, but it's interesting how tight-knit the NASCAR community has become and how quickly that sport has elevated itself into the popular limelight on the national landscape. But it's interesting to me, not even being a NASCAR fan, I know what that number represents. For them, it represents Dale Earnhardt, who died in a tragic crash. For me, the number 3 represents the Trinity. But it's interesting how NASCAR fans, even those that weren't really Dale Earnhardt fans, understand the contributions that he made to that sport and honor his memory, even though they're not fans of, or they were not fans of his when he was driving. Now they honor him. They hallow his name in a way. And it's interesting to me when Jesus is teaching his disciples to pray and he's saying, hallowed be your name, Father. Hallow his name. Honor it. Set it apart. how much I've missed that in my life, how much I've missed hallowing and honoring and upholding the third commandment in my own life. And so as you think about it and you go through it, think about God's name and what it means, and how you, in your life and the things that you put your life in order and priority around, how you can hallow God's name. And then also you're going to talk about in your life group, uh, God's, your kingdom come, God, your kingdom, not my kingdom, your will, not my will, your priorities, not my priorities. What matters in heaven, help it to matter on earth, in me, in this life. They're not cheap words. Sometimes we say them flippantly. Sometimes we pray them easily. But the application is radical when we really wrap our mind and our heart around this prayer. Have a great discussion in your life group, and may God richly bless you as you invest in each other and order your lives around things that matter most.